Thursday here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Normally we're a Wednesday show, but because of Christmas, we moved things around and the craziness that happened in that Steelers beatdown from the Kansas City Chiefs. We're going to break down that beatdown. We're going to talk about where this team needs to go from here, all here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo. It's going to be a big one. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo. We are he's your Steelers beat writer from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We are both from the Post-Gazette. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, and sometimes Thursdays episodes here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And don't forget, there's always daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And don't forget that this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether injured in a car accident or hurt on the job, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injury victims for over 40 years recover more than $2 billion on their behalf. If you or a loved one have been seriously injured in an accident, call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, you kind of detailed it in your report card. This was a terrible performance and a third straight one from the Steelers. Lots of Fs given them around in your Post-Gazette report card. But I thought what was interesting was after the game, there was a lot of frustration to go around from the team. Guys like DeShon, Elliott saying, like, we're communicating, we just aren't executing. And the frustration saying guys can't be wide bleeping open. Talking about that, and you can see that clip on the Post-Gazette's YouTube channel, by the way, if you want to go check that out. We were in the locker room asking those questions. Cam Hayward talking about, we can't have 10 guys doing their job and one guy not. And it seems that Patrick Queen with a similar comment. It seems like we're starting to narrow down. It's like Clue. Like, we know it's not Miss Scarlet. We know it's not Colonel Mustard. Maybe it's this guy's Professor Plum. So who's Professor Plum right now, Ray? We'll get to the offense in a sec, but it seems clear to me that there's some there's some frustrations with things in the defense.
It's not all that difficult to try to figure out who is being talked about here. I mean, honestly, the secondary has been so banged up, and this has been a constant theme for 3 weeks now. So we know Joey Porter didn't play yesterday, so they're not talking about Joey. Mm-hmm. Dante Jackson didn't play the week before that, so it's probably not Dante. And DeShon Elliott wasn't in the past 2 games. So, I think we're narrowing it down to, likely guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick and maybe Cam Sutton. I don't want to sit here and play the blame game and not, 100% know what's going on. But that first touchdown, Chris, to Xavier Worthy in the flat, you heard what Patrick Queen said about it. He said, we knew they were going to do that. We had a check for it. We got to the check, and we still didn't execute. And you saw how late Minkah was there. Minkah basically recognized it late, and then even when he got there, Worthy was way too fast for him and got to the pylon before Minkah could tackle him. So, the Kelce one he was even more wide open. Kelce was. So this has been going on for 3 weeks now. It even happened early in the season, against the Colts. So it's not a new thing, and it's more than troubling as the Steelers prepare for the postseason here in a couple of weeks.
No, yeah, I think that Minkah Fitzpatrick certainly. There's no other person to point at for the Xavier Worthy touchdown. The Kelce touchdown, you could see Minkah Fitzpatrick was over on DeAndre Hopkins, and no one else was really on him in the end zone. But the problem is Kelce ran to the middle, and no one ran with him. And so you look at things there. I thought Cam Sutton could have kept running with Kelce in that situation. But bottom line is, the Steelers have had game plans. I think that's the thing is people don't see that the practice is there's coordinated efforts to get things done. It's just the Chiefs have been very good at beating coordinated efforts all season long. It's funny. I saw after the game, people were like, this was the most beatable Chiefs team of their era. And I'm like, you mean the most beatable 15-1 team, 15-1 team? Is that a thing? Is that what are we doing here with that? And the Chiefs, certainly they almost beat the Raiders, they almost beat the Panthers, but they're playing some really good football, especially of late. They haven't turned the ball over in 6 weeks. I think they've had 10 turnovers in the last 4 games or something like that. They've been on a tear. They came into a Steelers team that's been reeling, and they had some problems. And it wasn't just the defense; the offense stunk it up too. I think that's the other thing there is that you heard some frustrations from there on the offense. I think Russell Wilson talking about things, but obviously George Pickens on Russell Wilson's interception doesn't run it out. It's bad, Ray. It's bad when your effort's bad when Terrell Owens is calling you out on Twitter and saying, yeah, this guy's not trying hard enough. And I'm like, geez, Terrell Owens of all people calling out George Pickens right now. It's looking grim there. And I think, again, it comes down to what Alex Highsmith said, what Cam Hayward said, what everyone's talking about. Details. You got to be in your details. The Steelers had been a detailed football team for most of this season. And I even say the Eagles lost. There were some things but they weren't completely out of sorts in that one. I felt like out of the losses that they've had the last 3 weeks, this might have been the most discombobulated we've seen the Steelers as a team when it comes to figuring out those details.
Yeah, and this came after, I know it was a short week, but it came after, a few days of us hearing, if we fix the communication issues, we'll be fine. Well, they're not fine because they cannot fix the communication issues. And, that's what's going on defense right now. You mentioned Pickens. I want to talk about that a little bit. That wasn't the only play that he didn't run his route. Opening series, Chris. First down pass to Pat Freiermuth, 7 yards. The next play, Najee Harris run 1 yard. Okay, 3rd and 2, they're in shotgun. They pass. George Pickens basically jogs off the line of scrimmage for 2 steps, turns around, doesn't expect the ball, and Russell Wilson fumbles and takes that snap, and they got a punt. I mean, they were expecting to get a big lift with George Pickens coming back, and he did have that early 41-yard catch. But when you're not doing what you're supposed to do, it just throws off the entire offense. And, that was I just felt like that has to be pointed out. It wasn't just one route that he didn't run. There were other instances where that didn't happen either.
No, I agree, and like the lack of effort is not a new thing with George Pickens. Last year you had the Jaylen Warren non-blocking for him in the red zone, and granted you saw him turn a new leaf at the end of the season. But the problem was this was his contract year. Well, it's not really his contract year, but this was the year to set himself up for his contract year, and he certainly made some spectacular plays. And I think that there's times that he's been a good teammate. Like for example, people were saying the Browns game a couple of weeks ago when he first got injured, and people were like, oh, I think Tomlin benched him because of his attitude and this, that, and the third. And he didn't bench him because of his attitude. He was right down and they said, oh, he's not at the game. He's not trying to be on the sidelines when he's not playing. And then he was there on the sidelines for the last 3 games that he didn't play, and he was cheering on his teammates. But none of that matters if you come out and you don't do your job in that. And if and I think you can see it a little bit in George Pickens. If the ball's not coming his way, he's not as concerned. And especially in an offense when it's about distributing the football around. It's not like the Antonio Brown days where Ben Roethlisberger was like, you know what? Forget about everything else. I'm going to 84 because he's just that good. And maybe George Pickens has that kind of talent to be that kind of a guy. But the Steelers offense as it is right now needs to be a balanced group that doesn't rely on one player taking over games. That's what Russell Wilson's trying to do. But when your top target isn't doing the things to set himself up as the top target to make so that he can also be a decoy in the offense, it's going to ruin that entire passing attack. Yeah,
listen, even if that 3rd and 2 on the first drive isn't designed for him, when you recognize Russell Wilson is off his first and second read and he's he's in trouble and he might get sacked, try to get open. Just don't stand there and look around and go through the motion. So, I mean, it's a shame. I thought maybe he turned it around a little bit this season, but I mean, my God, 3 games, missing a hamstring injury, you come back. You think you can help your football team, and you don't even try on probably more than 2 plays. We're pointing out 2, Chris. There's probably more in there where he did the same thing. It's disappointing. And honestly, Chris, I think it speaks to not only George, it speaks to the coaching staff's inability to get through to him over the course of a season. It's okay. Maybe he behaves for a few weeks, but you got to clean that up, and you got to be able to, have him be on the same page with the rest of his teammates. And if it doesn't happen, you got to discipline him. So I don't know what's going to happen here going forward. We could talk about that after they get knocked out of the playoffs, but not a good look for George yesterday.
No, it's not, especially when at the end of the game when the Steelers, they're making more mistakes and he's very frustrated. But then he's the one kind of crashing out on the field, taking his helmet off, like just so disbelief that they're not getting things done. It's like, buddy, you're part of that right now. Like you've made your fair share of mistakes in this loss that have cost the team. So, like you said, I think that the Steelers coaching staff has gotten through to him, but it's always for spurts, and at some point, it falls upon the player to be immature, to be an adult, and to take and to not need to be coached and babied all 24/7 to be that guy. And he has had that happen.
And it falls on the front office when it comes time to think about doing his contract this summer to say, hey, maybe let's move on, let's trade him, let's get a pick for him, because I really I'm starting to think that you can't win with guys like George Pickens.
Yep, that's kind of what it's looking like at this point. He has to turn it around like he did last year. The Steelers have to turn it around. I want to talk about, like last year, how they got into this 3-game skid. Are they comparable? Because a lot of people are saying this feels just like last season. I want to talk about those and where there might be some commonalities, if not between the 2 skids, between the 3 games the Steelers have lost here. We'll talk about that next year on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, stick with us. But first, I want to remind you the show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. If you're injured in an accident, you're probably wondering what's next. Well, for 40 years, Edgar Snyder Associates have helped injury victims answer that very question, whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with the insurance companies. Edgar Snyder Associates has helped over 75,000 people handle the what's next question. Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's look at this Steelers team right now and where it stands, because if you go back last year, you could see a few things that I think a lot of people are pointing at, and they're saying, hey, wait a second. They lost 3 games in a row. Last year, late in the season, they lost 3 games in a row then. Now let's, looking back at last year when those 3 games came, the Steelers were in a good position at that point. I think they had they were 7-4 at that time, and they were in the AFC North race, and they had 2 back-to-back 2-win teams coming to Acrisure Stadium. They lost both games, the Cardinals and the Patriots, and then they lost to the Colts a 3rd straight game in a row, and then that set them up in a position where they were 7-7, and people were wondering would they finally have a losing season under Mike Tomlin. They bounced back against the home game against the Bengals. Funny enough, that's who they play next week again. And they were able to win 3 straight to close out the regular season, get to 10-7, and get into the playoffs. But this team this year, I think a lot of people look at it and they see similar things. I said this going into this week. I picked the Steelers to lose this week and lose to the Eagles. I thought they might beat the Ravens because of how they played them lately. But I said, like, hey, you know what? All season long, or even like when the season began, and we saw even before the season, we saw the schedule get released, and we saw these 3 games line up, and we're like, woof, that's gonna be a rough stretch. We knew this was gonna be tough. I feel like this is different from last year, because last year, it happened a little bit earlier, and those were some really bad teams. There were certainly some other things going on with the Steelers. They had fired their coordinator at one point, and all those other things they were trying to get through to. But I think this time around, the Steelers, for the most part of the season, they've been a better team than they were last season. They just ran into 3 really good teams that are all Super Bowl contenders in 11 days.
Yeah, so here's the thing, Chris. Would it make any difference, in your opinion, on the Steelers as the playoffs approach if they open the season with 3 consecutive losses to 3 really good teams like the Eagles, the Ravens, and the Chiefs? And let's say they're still 10-6 at this point in the season, and let's say they just got done beating up on the Browns on Christmas Day. Yeah. Previously, they beat the Bengals, and maybe the Falcons game was in early December. Does that change your opinion of the Steelers? I mean, I go back to what Russell Wilson said yesterday. This team is so flawed right now. They got so much to clean up. Russell admitted that. But he said, once the postseason gets here, you're 0-0. And the Steelers have to understand that. So they got to use these next 10 days, right? They got to practice better. They got to come out and get some things done in that Cincinnati game. And they have to realize that they have a clean slate when they go on the road, likely for their first playoff game. So that's the bottom line here. But I do think you're right. This team is different. Last year, Mike Tomlin sat there before us and said, we're not going to sit here and do the same things. We're going to make some changes. Well, one of those changes was Mike Sullivan becoming the play caller and firing Matt Canada. You're not going to do that now. So
no, not with Arthur Smith.
Yeah, I mean, you got to figure out. It's probably going to be personnel changes this year, right? So Jaylen Warren for Najee Harris, I think that's a natural. What do you do with Pickens? That's more of a mental game. You got to get him in the game because you need that guy. But there's all kinds of things that can be improved here. And I think the first thing is you get your best running back in there to start the game. And I think that's Jaylen Warren.
I mean, Jaylen Warren averaged 6.5 yards per carry. Now, if you look at the stats, Najee Harris did average 5.7, but a lot of that came in garbage time at the it was late in the fourth quarter when the Chiefs were like, all right, have those runs. Now, I will say, Najee Harris did break 1,000 yards in that stretch. I looked up at the end of the game. I was like, wait, what? I didn't. Someone told me that, and I couldn't believe that he hit the 1,000-yard mark at that point with those late runs that he had. So I thought that was funny. But to your point, looking at this team and the things that they haven't done and the things that they need to do, and we're going to get more into things they need to do to turn things around specifically. But I see when you look at last year, there were obvious changes that needed to be made, and they did not know what they needed to do at quarterback. Like when they went to Mason Rudolph against the Bengals, that was let's hope this works. And then it happened to work, and they hit a stride in those games. They need to hit some sort of stride in this game. And I think in this next game against the Bengals, and then if they can beat the Bengals next week, the AFC North is out of hand. The Ravens are going to win that. But I predicted also the Ravens were probably going to win the AFC North. They were my AFC pick to win the conference in the first place. But you could set yourself up for, if you beat the Bengals, and this is a Bengals team that this team, even as they have to play better than they did the last 3 weeks, but as they're constituted right now, this team can beat the Bengals. You beat the Bengals on a 10-day break, then you most likely at that point get the Houston Texans. Not even most likely. I think if they win, they're guaranteed to play the Houston Texans because the Texans are locked into the 4 seed. The Texans are playing some terrible football right now. You could go on the road. If you gut out a road win against that playoff team, then you give yourselves 2 games to get right and to fix the things that you haven't done, to focus on things, to be more detailed, and to actually execute in the things that you're talking about, and for the offense to get back on track. And then you can go on the road and play one of those big bad top 3 AFC teams after that. But you have to take advantage of this moment, this 10-day break. They've got to take time. There's got to be someone who talks to George Pickens, whether it's Mike Tomlin, whether it's Zach Azani, whoever it is. They got to get through to him. The O-line has to play a lot better. But Russell Wilson got sacked 5 times in this game. He was just under siege to the point where he was getting happy feet. And I think that was one thing leading up to this game. I was like, Russell Wilson, whenever he's been under pressure, he's hung in there. He's thrown the ball away. But you can see it's starting to get to him, and they got to do better there. And I think that's the problem, is that you can't have you can't have your quarterback missing reads and your offensive line giving up pressure and your run game not being all that consistent and wide receivers not running the right routes and and your pass defense miscommunicating. Now, I will say the run defense did return this week. They did. Kareem Hunt 2.2 yards per carry, Isaiah Pacheco 3 yards per carry. They didn't make that, but that doesn't matter when you give up 320 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and you never sack Patrick Mahomes. You never force a turnover. And the Steelers, they have to get back to being the team that asserts themselves in the game, the team that makes the difference, because right now, these past 3 weeks, they've been the one kind of waiting for the other team to make a mistake. When they beat the Ravens, they forced those turnovers. They were able, they punched the ball out. They attacked the quarterback. They got the interception down the field. They haven't been that team for 3 straight weeks, and I think that's the big difference maker right now.
And Chris, those turnovers are there to be had. I mean, Patrick Queen could have called for a fair catch. He caught his. He dropped it. Second week in a row, Mark Robinson causes a fumble on special teams. They don't get on the ball, kind of a lucky bounce. I mean, the ball pops out, hits a Chiefs player, and bounces right back to another Chiefs player. That happens. But when you're a defense that is going to give up tons of yards and you can't play red zone defense, you need those turnovers. And the Steelers have been way too dependent on turnovers this year. They've just been hemorrhaging yards, and their red zone defense right now is the worst in the NFL. I mean, they don't – there's not even a thought from other teams of kicking field goals when they get close to the Steelers now. It's all about punching it into the end zone. And, one more thing about this football team, it's kind of an aside, but, you're talking about leadership and, guys standing up. The vets who have been here, guys who have performed on the field in the past, aren't standing up after games and answering questions. And I know it's a small detail maybe to some portions of the fan base, but as a journalist who's been doing this for 30 years, I think it's a big thing. Najee Harris walked out of that locker room yesterday, the first one out before the media was even allowed in. He didn't answer any questions. Minkah Fitzpatrick did not answer any questions yesterday.
Said there's nothing to talk about.
Yeah, and we all know what's going on with him and, the blame game there. And I just find it odd. It's very weird to me the way this team is built, that you have new guys like Patrick Queen who have to stand up every week and talk and answer questions. DeShon Elliott, a new guy, standing up and answering questions. Yeah, Cam Hayward does it. Yeah, TJ Watt does it. But all the vets have to stand up and do that. And I just think that kind of tells you a little bit about the leadership or the lack thereof it with certain veterans on this football team.
And that was leadership that I think this team expected to have. Like, Patrick Queen was supposed to be like the cherry on top to this defense to make them a more complete unit. And I'd say, even though the pressure didn't get home yesterday against Patrick Mahomes, I'm not putting this one as much on TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith and even Hayward and Benton. I thought that they, if anything, they were doing what they could to kind of keep things going. But they needed more coverage help. They needed to not let, like DeShon Elliott, the guys can't be wide bleeping open. And if there's certain plays where Travis Kelce, and again, Travis Kelce of all players, not just the touchdown, but there were times he just broke open where guys just left him alone, and it's just like, man, like, if there's one person you have to count for in this Chiefs offense, it's that guy. And when the coverage isn't there, it doesn't matter how well you rush the passer. They're going to get the ball off in less than 2 seconds, and it's going to be a completion for a decent gain. And to your point, leadership when you have it, Minkah Fitzpatrick. I was the one that asked him. I was like, hey, this is a. I was like, hey, Minkah, can you talk? And he says no. He says no. He's like, I'm not talking today. He's like, there's nothing to talk about. And I was kind of like, I don't know. I think there's a lot to talk about. I just watched you guys get your butt kicked for the third week in a row. And listen, I think part of it, Minkah Fitzpatrick is a passionate player. He puts his pride on the defense, and the defense has stunk for 3 straight weeks. And so, he's probably frustrated. But like you said, DeShon Elliott, Patrick Queen, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, they can all talk.
Yep.
Huh? Yeah. Alex Highsmith. They all talked, and so why can't the guy who's supposed to be the leader of your secondary do that? I think that there's maybe there's some admission of guilt there, silently. Maybe there's just some overall frustration bubbling over, but obviously it's a major issue, and if they don't resolve it, in this next 10-day period and take this time to come together and figure some things out, they'll actually lose this game to the Bengals, and then they'll head into Houston as on a 4-game losing streak, and who knows what happens there. The only good thing right now, Ray, I'd say, is that they did enough work early in the season to guarantee themselves a playoff spot despite this stretch.
Chris, I got news for you. If they lose to the Bengals, they're probably going to the Ravens.
That's a good point. I forgot about that.
Because I don't think the Chargers are going to lose in the next 2 weeks. So there's a lot on the line here with this Bengals game. I know people don't realize it maybe, but if they lose, I think their chances of winning are going to be going down, way down. Because I think they could actually beat a bad Houston Texans team. They got no shot of winning in Baltimore. the way they're playing right now.
The way they're playing right now, absolutely not. Let's talk about how they can turn things around. We'll do that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, I want to remind you that we're also brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They are your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them now for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, or visit their website at moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
It's that time of year again to get the Honda of your dreams during Happy Honda Days, where you'll find great offers on a sporty new Civic, spirited Accord, fun-to-drive HRV, and versatile CRV. So don't wait. Turn your holiday dreams into reality with a new Honda named KBB.com's best value brand. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, this Steelers team has now been on some bad trends for the past 3 weeks, again, against really good teams, but still bad trends that have led into them. Like you just said, if they lose to the Bengals, you're right. They might not even get a chance to play the Texans, and that's right now. And they're playing also not good football. They end up playing the Ravens. Is there a chance for them to play the Bills? Like, could they fall as far as the 7th seed? I don't know if the Chargers and the Broncos can surpass them.
It would depend on what happens with the Broncos in the final 2 weeks. Because right now the Steelers are 10-6. They could end up with 7 losses, and as long as the Broncos and the Chargers keep on winning, they wouldn't have 7 losses. So.
Yeah, well, there you go, right there. And they don't play each other again. And you know what? The Chargers got the Patriots and the Raiders. They could handle business there. I will say the Broncos, they get the Bengals this week, and then the Chiefs that are going to be resting their starters in the last week. So maybe there is a chance. Maybe there is a chance that there's something going on there. And I think that there's some big questions about the Steelers need to turn around. But let's talk about that turnaround that needs to happen, because I do think that puts this in a must-win situation. I look at the things here. In all 3 of these games, the Steelers, you go look at the Eagles game, the Ravens game, and the Chiefs game. They were in this game at halftime, and they had chances in the third quarter, but it was like late in the third quarter. If they didn't capitalize in the fourth quarter, you just saw everything flow away. It was a 4-point game against the Eagles. They tied the game against the Ravens in the second half. This was a 6-point game in the third quarter, and going into the fourth quarter with this game against the Chiefs. These were all games that they were in. They just got destroyed late here. Yeah. What are some of the biggest things that have to change if they want to turn that around in the final week and set themselves up for a better playoff spot?
Yeah, well, I'll get into personnel changes, but to me, just playing complementary football first and foremost. You mentioned how these games are. The Steelers are within a score against these 3 really good teams, but it just kind of feels like if they don't capitalize in the third quarter, they've got no chance, right? Because the defense has been playing terribly. They're not going to hold anyone. And then conversely, the offense is averaging 13 points per game over this 3-game stretch. And you don't have any confidence that they're going to figure it out either, which brings me to their starts, Chris. In this 3-game losing streak, they are being outscored 30-3 in the first quarters of these games. To me, the most obvious thing that you do is you let your best running back start the game. Jaylen Warren has pop. He's got burst. He can make plays in the passing game. Najee Harris at this stage of the season, even though he got 1,000 yards, he's just plodding out there, and he doesn't. Maybe his legs are gone at this stage of the season. I don't know, but it's so obvious that Jaylen Warren is the better back right now. Maybe you change your luck. I mean, Chris, what would happen if you actually get a lead in one of these games? Then maybe things turn around. You're not constantly fighting uphill to get back in these football games. So for me, the number one thing they got to do, make Jaylen Warren your starting running back and keep him in there for the majority of the game.
No, listen, I think fast starts, that's something that the Steelers have been talking about all season long. Like you said, when you put yourself down 13-0 to the 15-1 Chiefs team, they were 14-1, but now they are 15-1. But when you're down 13-0 to the Chiefs, you're putting yourself, behind the eight ball. You're putting yourself in a really rough spot to have to figure things out. When you're playing the Ravens, and you put yourself down. What it was 17-7, not as big a deficit, but still double digits. And now you have to work back to tie it up. They get a 10-point run, and then that's just to tie it up in that game. You put yourself in a rough spot. And it's the same thing, with the Eagles in that stretch. You can't allow yourself to get down. In all three of these games, they have allowed themselves to get behind, and it's ended up costing them in this game. Against the Eagles, they were down 17-3. So you're right. Those early deficits, clearly you can fight back and make it a competitive game. And against not top tier teams, maybe you can even win those games. But against top tier teams, you cannot fall that far behind because, to your point, let's say in this week they play the Chiefs, and instead of that interception, and granted, there was also a rushing touchdown called back before that interception, but let's say that drive turns into a touchdown. All of a sudden, it's 7-6 at that point. I think, maybe it would have been
13-7.
That was after the second touchdown. But again, 13-7, and then you get that other it's 14-3 at halftime. That's a completely different feel of things, and then that allows yourself to kind of play a little bit more and be a little bit more aggressive, and you can put pressure on the Chiefs to have to do things. They haven't done that in the past 3 weeks, and that was something that I thought that they did. As Russell Wilson pointed out, they had been a really good third quarter offense, a really good second half offense, figuring things out later in games. They haven't done that in the last 2 weeks. It's proved costly, and I think the defense they've even showed they've made adjustments. They adjusted to things the Eagles are doing, things Ray was doing. They adjusted to things the Chiefs were doing, but eventually they cracked when the offense didn't come play complimentary football.
Yeah, and how often did we talk about it early in the season when they were winning games? How all three phases were working together. Big special teams plays that helps out with field position. The punting was really good. It seems like they're not doing anything well right now. Yeah, the special teams they're still creating turnovers, but they're not getting on them. But it just kind of seems like Corliss Waitman had a chance to pin them deep. He can get it to the 22-yard line, kicking from his 50. I mean, just everything is not working right now. And there's just been a snowball effect with this football team. And listen, Chris, we'll see if they can turn it around against the Bengals, but I saw something on social media last night after the game. These 3 double-digit losses in a row, first time that's happened
88?
Since 1988. And how bad that team was. That team was 5-11. You are a bad football team in the NFL if you get your doors blown off 3 weeks in a row the way the Steelers have. So I don't have great confidence going into this Week 18 game against the Bengals, even though it's at home. I don't have any confidence watching this football team perform. I can't get it through my head that they actually are going to turn it around and win that football game.
I mean, that's kind of the state that they've left you in, right? It's kind of how everyone felt going into the home Bengals game last year when they were on a 3-game skid, and they were like, they're not going to turn this around. They're going to pitch up their tent, fold everything up, and get going. Now, for all the things, Mike Tomlin, everyone always kind of dismisses Mike Tomlin's non-losing season streak and all those things. This team won 10 games about a month ago, and they're now sitting here at 10-6. This isn't about non-losing seasons. This is now about turning things around. I think the only thing that benefits them is that this time when they're turning things around, they've clinched the playoffs. They've gotten the winning season. Now they're just trying to fight for a better position in the playoffs. And that is where, we've seen Mike Tomlin teams turn things around when the grimmest part of the season has come. I think, you go back to 2019 when things were looking really rough with Devlin Hodges. They somehow flipped things around, got to 8-5, and they collapsed at the end. But again, I think they very much overachieved with a 4th-string undrafted rookie quarterback. You can go back to 2021 when they started off. What was there, 2-6, 2-7 on the year, and they finished 9-8 with Kenny Pickett as a rookie, T.J. Watt coming back from injury, and they were able to figure. They've had some impressive turnarounds. This would be the time for that turnaround. You would have liked it to come last week or the week before that, but if they're going to have that turnaround, that it's going to take something drastic. It's going to take a major statement, and it would change the tenor of things. But you have to see it. We've seen it for the past few years, the Steelers, but we've seen it when they've been doing it just to barely eke into the playoffs. This is their chance to cement themselves as one of the middle tier teams in the playoffs, get a better opponent to have to play in the first round of the playoffs, and increase their chances of maybe winning a playoff game. And again, give yourselves 2 weeks, not just one, but 2 weeks to figure things out before you have to play one of those other top AFC teams on the road again.
Yeah, I mean, listen, a month ago we were talking about, hey, the Steelers are in the upper echelon of the AFC. They've got a chance to be the number 1 seed. I think there is a clear delineation now. It's the Chiefs, it's the Bills, and the Ravens as the top 3. I'm not really sure which order. And then there's a huge drop-off to the Steelers, the Texans, the Chargers, the Broncos, and who even knows, maybe the Bengals can sneak into the playoffs. But right now, the Steelers are a middling seed in the AFC, and I don't really feel all that confident that the results in January this year are going to be a whole lot different than what they were in 2021 or 2023 when they got to the playoffs and they got blown out in that first round game.
Certainly, they're not giving you much confidence, especially when, like you said, they lose the way they have in 3 straight weeks. We still got another episode tomorrow coming out on North Shore Drive podcast with Brian Batko. We'll do that then. We'll take another hard look at things. I think Brian will be in the locker room on later today, so we'll get some reactions there. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about some games this weekend that Steelers fans can look towards to. We'll get to all that here on the North Shore Drive podcast. From Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, we hope everyone had a Merry Christmas. We hope those who celebrate have a happy Kwanzaa, and we hope everyone has a happy holidays as we continue this stretch here. Again, we do have a Friday episode of North Shore Drive podcast setting you up for the weekend. Then we will be back Monday setting you up for the regular season finale and what the Steelers need to do that week. All here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Keep it here with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.